that helped to further develop and further design the movie. And he has sometimes a little bit of bad reputation in Hollywood, that he is arrogant and he's kind of like distant. But he was totally different on this movie. He was very cooperative, and he came into the art department. He talked to us because he was a producer on it. We usually have to introduce the producer to the concept, I mean mainly the production designer. And he was very open, he was very engaged. And we just talked about that Lady Reed. She actually won an Oscar now, and she's one of the most sought after black actresses in Hollywood now. So that was her jumping board where she took off. So now, yeah.
Before you start, you need a mic for the stream.
Oh,
Okay.
do you really want to stream it?
Well, people are watching.
Okay.
You're in Hollywood.
Yes.
Okay.
But since we have done it, we might as well use it, no?
Yes.
So is that any students in their rooms?
Yeah, waiting.
Still just going to be over here.
Sorry.
Is it
that should be, yeah, if you just give that a try, should be on.
Okay, good. Okay, so art department, that's what we are doing. We're basically working for the production designer. The production designer is in charge of all the visuals in the movie except the costumes. So whether it's an interior of a building, whether it's a new building, whether it's designing a new coffee machine or a high-tech gadget, whether it's the Batmobile, that falls under the jurisdiction, the responsibility of the production designer. Usually today, it didn't exist like 20 years ago. We have, instead of an art director, we have a supervising art director, because when you work on bigger movies, you need somebody who coordinates the whole art department. And the art department exists out of art directors. On Avengers, I think we were 12. I was an art director there. Then you have the concept artist, which starts very early on. We have the location managers, they're looking for the locations where to shoot. Then we have the previs people in these days. They do animated previs of the movie. Usually you create the whole movie as an animation, so the DB can see what kind of lenses they're gonna use. And in these days it gets really sophisticated. Coordinators, set designers on Avengers, I think we had about 16, between 16 and 20 set designers. They're creating everything today is created in 3D, so we can put it through the so-called pipeline and give it to visual effects. They're gonna import it, they're gonna render it and make it look real. Graphic artists, model makers, then of course construction. Again, on Avengers we had over 350 construction people, women and men, sculptors, welders, carpenters, masons, painters, a huge paint department of course. And greens, those are the landscapers. They build whole forests and basically create the green reality. The art department used to be the biggest department in a movie production up until maybe 10, 15 years ago. Now it's the visual effects department. When you look at the credit, if you have the patience, how many people work on the in the visual effects departments, it can go over 1,200 people, all the renderers and so forth. Now, what I'd like to show you is basically, since we're in 2024, what's actually happening in the beginning of a movie. It's a scene out of Infinity War. That's the first picture we start. Once this is approved, the mood boards, we call them, are created, which are basically representing the mood in the movie, the timeline, whether it's science fiction, whether it's a period movie. After like weeks of work and discussion with the director, with the DP, you come up with an opening scene. And that's the illustration. Then you go more into details. You show materials. You show how many people you want in there. You show weather conditions, like here with a little bit of fog in the morning. And you show the whole volume, what you want to see in the movie. Then you go further away. You show the world, like the planet, whatever it is, the landscape, mountains in the background. You show eventual flying objects. Anything you can see here creates basically the mood of the movie, or only a particular scene. Like, for instance, in Avengers, you switch from planets from one to the other. So for every planet, for every environment, you create an illustration like this. Then you create a 3D environment and you animate it. So that's the first step, where you basically start creating a scene and also like define the perspectives, and you make it basically possible for us to start opening up the discussion, what can we build? Because ultimately it's the money which dictates us how creative we can get and what we can actually build. I just want to focus on this part here. Just keep that in mind. Here we go. So that's the pagoda. We designed in 3D. We had about 6 researchers. The researchers, they research material. They go back in time. They analyze what, for instance, in the year 600 or 800 or 1200, how they built things, how they constructed it, what kind of tools they needed, and so forth. And then, after like hours and weeks of discussion with the director, with the DP, you sooner or later have to decide, okay, that's what we're going to build. Then you look for a location where you want to build it. This was, we called it a backlot in Atlanta at Pinewood. There used to be Pinewood Studios. And you lay it out. Again, you talk to visual effects. What can we do? How big can we build? And what can you extend? That's the photograph of the location. That's how we started. A table, a couple of tape measures, a couple of cones, And the next step is, of course, you create all the drawings for the floors. Then you lay it out, dry. This is already, hold on a second, sorry. This is already built. That's basically a circle in, I think it was in 3 pieces, and it's basically cement, hemp fibers, and paint in it. These guys here, the tiles, they're already made, but you always go back and forth. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it doesn't fit together, so it's quite a process. That was, until we were done, it was a 6-week build, actually, from the time we laid it out to finishing up and being ready to shoot. Here we go, just a couple of segments, how we built it. And then you just get bigger and bigger. We used pretty much the same materials they used to when they built it, like the reference for this was an old pagoda in Nepal, and we tried to figure out how they built it then, and also about the stones, and we tried to get as close as possible to the colors, to the dyes they used for the cement, for the clay, and so forth. Then we set up the blue screens. They used to be green screens, but they use blue in these days because it ties better in the sky and it's easier to replace digitally with the actual extensions. So we had I think about 12 pettibones, like the Manitous, and they have this big 20 by 20 foot panels, so they can move it around depending on where you put the camera. You just take the panel, drive it around, and put it where you need it. Then that was already the shoot, the first day of shooting, with the actors. Because of Thanos, he is one of the main actors in this movie. He is much taller than the physical actor actually is in the movie. So you have all these extensions they're carrying, and all the yellow markers, the orange markers, that's all a reference for visual effects, and they're going to be replaced with actual gadgets, with the costume, and so forth. So you see what we actually built. We built the whole floor, and we built the columns, but we didn't build the roof. The roof was basically simulated with big panels, with stretched fabric on 20 by 20 frames, and they're going to get moved around and simulate the shadow, because the shadow you need. Creating shadow after in post-production digitally is very expensive. So you try to get as close as possible to what you actually need. Here you go. No, I think that's an animation. Yeah.
C'est joli, n'est-ce pas? Parfaitement équilibré, comme toute chose devrait l'être, s'il penche d'un côté ou de l'autre. contre toi. Voilà. Tu as réussi.
Here you go. So that's a quick intro, what we actually do sometimes. Of course, it entails much more about it, depending on what movie you're working on. When you do on a contemporary movie, you don't have to do that much design and that much build. You basically take over a location, and you may change one or two windows, and then the set decorator comes in and changes the curtains, the interior furniture. We may change a little bit of the exterior. So it's basically an art director's or an art department dream if you get the opportunity to work on something like that, because usually we're engaged for maybe 5 to 6, 7 months on a movie, but Avengers 1, 2 was, I think, 18 to 20 months. I wasn't on the whole part of it. I was working on it for about 12 months, like a year, which is long. And then the other movies, as I said, they go between like 4 or 5 months and 6 or 7 months. One of my favorite movies was All the Light We Cannot See. It was a Netflix series which came out, I think, a year ago or so. And it was a period piece. It started in 1924 and ended with the Siege of Saint-Malo, which was 44. Yeah, I think so. And this is, for us, it's kind of a dream come true, because you need to do all the research and you have to create it, and the challenge actually kicks in when you have to go onto an existing location like we did, like for instance Saint-Malo, and you have to create 1944 during a bombing raid of the Allies, and you have to create all the debris and damage and so forth, of course, with the help of visual effects at the end. But that's the big challenge. So I think, I mean, I could go on and on. I don't know what the timing is. We should maybe answer a couple of questions. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I could go on and tell you about and show you pictures, but maybe these other two. So that was a model of the Batcave for Batman versus Superman. We shot it in Detroit on a studio, and we had to remove one of the walls in between the different stages because it was so big, and it was structurally was quite challenging. This one was the stage, and there was a wall. Oops, sorry. I think that was the out of it. Anyway, there was a wall up here, right here, and this wall was taken out. So we basically had 3 spaces of it. And let me see. Okay, that's the interior. The resolution here on the screen is not as it should be, but there was a big drive-in ramp where the Batmobile was driving in, and the rest is all foam and wood, which then is made look like concrete. And that was the garage with a working Lazy Susan, where you were able physically to drive the Batmobile. And this is about 5 feet above the stage floor. So everything had to be engineered because the Batmobile itself is about like 2 tons, 2 metric tons. And everything had to be engineered and to be built so it was easily to turn all automatically, and you were actually able to drive into it. And that was for the Batwing. And that's why we needed the space of 3 stages, because all the upper buildings in the cave were actually cantilevered because we couldn't build, because of a design concept, we couldn't build columns to support it. So we needed to cantilever the whole building. That means we had to go way, way back to counterweight it down. So it's like a scale, basically. And so in this case, we need to work with engineers together. So it's like basically creating a real building, except that we take it down a couple of days after we're done with shooting it. We talked about it yesterday. It's a little bit a wasteful business. I'm fully aware of that, but we had a breakthrough. I mean, 2 companies had a breakthrough a couple of years ago, and they found a way to recycle the foam, the styrofoam. And that made us actually feel much better, because that was the biggest volume we always had to put into containers and throw it into landfills. And now today, they know how to recycle it. And most of the wood we're using gets taken apart. It's a little bit more expensive for us because we need to invest the labor, but we take it apart and then we give it to organizations like Habitat of Humanity and people who actually recycle it. Some of it gets shipped if you shoot in the US, some of it ships into Mexico, into Middle America, and some of it now gets transformed into pellets for big heating facilities. So it's still wasteful, but we feel a little bit better. So, okay,
Thank you.
That's it.
Oops. Thank you so much. We're going to have a Q&A session now, and I have a question here prepared, so the other people can cogitate their own questions. How did you and how does one get into the movie business?
It's a good question. I did when I was young. I did an apprenticeship as a building draftsman, and because I was sick of school, and then when I was done with that, I wanted to go back to school, so I went to architecture school, became an architect, and I was asked when I was still doing my apprenticeship if I could design a stage set for an open-air theater back in Switzerland. I was like for Bertolt Brecht's Caucasian Circle, and there were friends who organized this theater production. So I did that. It was very sparse, very modern. I did it mainly out of scaffolding materials and plywood, and actually got a kick out of it. And then I went to architecture school, got an amazing job back in Switzerland, and later on I had a job offer in the US, so I decided, let's move. And when I arrived in LA, they told me, sorry, we lost the job. So as a stand-up, serious Swiss citizen, it scared the crap out of me, not having a job, and I already saw myself being deported, surrounded by ICE people. And but my friend who was actually promising me the job and lost it, he was an architect I knew from before. He told me, don't worry, we'll get the green card and we'll send it to you. They don't care. So through another friend of mine over there who was a camera operator, I heard about the job opening at Roger Corman's. Roger Corman was the B-movie mogul in Hollywood, and his claim of fame is being the discoverer of Robert De Niro, Jack Nicholson, James Cameron. They all had their first movie experience in his studio at Roger Corman's. They were looking for a carpenter, and I said, of course I can do it, because in the meantime I knew you have to improvise a little bit. But I used to restore wooden sailing yachts, and so I knew how to handle tools, and then started as a carpenter. A few weeks later, the production designer figured out I know how to draw and how to build models, and the rest is history. Here you go.
Sorry, just before, I just didn't see the link between you being a carpenter and becoming a film photographer.
Right. Yeah.
So, any more questions, John?
Could I ask you, these kind of films, not the Eddie Murphy one, actually, I suppose, so much, but all these kind of things, they're going to be so affected by AI, aren't they? I mean, it's going to alter your job totally, won't it?
I was actually expecting this question. I was hoping it's not going to come, but it's a little bit a rabbit hole, this whole AI thing. We just ratified the new contracts between the union, because when you work on big movies in the US, everything is unionized. And we just had the ratification, and it's very complicated, all the articles and the chapters they wrote into the new thing. But you're absolutely right. What happened? It already happened that, for instance, director, if he doesn't do it himself, he just hires a friend of his or somebody who's got a little bit of illustration experience, and he tells him, okay, I need this and this mood. Can you give me an illustration of it? He may get a pretty accurate description of the mood he would like to see in the movie, but that's it. You still need, in order to refine it, you still need the illustrator himself, the human being, to follow his direction. You may use AI for a very rough concept, but it's still not as reliable, as individual, as exactly as your emotion as a director or as a production designer, ultimately, as you see it and as you feel it. Because until the director and the designer agree for a certain mood, for a certain ambiance in a scene, there are hours or days, sometimes weeks of work, of fiddling with, no, put some light in there, no, I don't like this object, no, it shouldn't be like this. There's a lot of work. And yes, of course, you can create the first couple of impressions with AI, but we did some tests. I'm actually friends of mine who are illustrators. They did some tests and tried to define the mood with AI and describe it and tell the computer, okay, I want to do this, I want to do that. It's very complicated. It's very complex when it comes to the creativity. We still need human beings who are able to interpret the actual emotions and then transfer it. Does that answer a little bit the question? Okay.
So you kind of, hello? Yeah. You kind of talked about, or you touched on the research process for the films like Batman and a lot of other Marvel films, which are all quite VFX reliant. I'm quite interested in, with the period pieces you've done, like, for example, Dolemite, how that research process differentiates.
I think when you do movies like Dolemite or All the Lights, you're pretty much squeezed into historic facts. Yes, of course, sometimes you tend to create something which you think it would look better, but it usually doesn't have a lot to do with the actual time period. Like, for instance, for Dolemite, there was a lot of research done by Ruth Carter. She was the production designer, and she's absolutely amazing. She won Oscars. She did Wakanda. She did the Black Panther, and she was very accurate. And of course, she has a lot of experience with that. You have less creativity if you do a period piece, because you have to do it based on facts. Because if you divert from the historic background, then you may see yourself noted in Rotten Tomatoes, because there are a lot of people out there, they're dissecting the movies and they're just waiting for some incorrect choice of gadgets, of furniture pieces, and say, that was designed 4 years later. And also with cars. With cars, you have to be incredibly careful. You always have to, our rule of thumb most of the time is like the actual date where you want to establish a scene, and then you deduct 3-4 years, and that's where you start searching the actual period cars, because nobody's driving a car which was released like 6 months before the time you're actually defining the shooting date. So
I can understand in the case of historical films the requirement for accuracy and faithfulness to fact. But in the case of the pavilion that you showed us, where you're copying in great detail an Asian pagoda, maybe Nepalese or Tibetan, I can't remember which, there you need to have researchers. They must be expensive. Why not just let, in a movie like that, some designers come up with something relatively exotic? Why do you need to pay so much attention to historical detail?
It will be always, when you create like sci-fi movies, like fantasy movies, it will never be 100% accurate representation of a certain time period. It's always treated as a reference. And the designer usually starts fiddling with the end product and tweak the aesthetics of it. So, and the research, we just do it. And basically the research in a fantasy movie is always just a guideline. And then every individual who creates the drawings, like the set designer or the illustrators, they always consciously or unconscientiously are always introducing their own opinion, their own interpretation of something in it. So it's actually nothing absolutely new, because when you design, you're always designing, and you have your unconscious or subconscious which guides you somewhere. You saw a building and you saw a detail maybe 2 years ago, and suddenly you remember that and you introduce it too. So.
Beat, right at the end, you mentioned that more recently that there has been some concerns about recycling and so on. When did it start? Is that a relatively new thing? Because nowadays you even see that the Brazilian military police now claims to be carbon neutral. So I wonder when it started in Hollywood, and how deep does it go?
I mean, it's getting the motivation. Of course, was less maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it's just, I think people are getting more and more aware about the waste. And I think we started pushing, especially the art department, construction and so forth. We started complaining more and more, although some people didn't like it when we opened our mouth. But I think the force, the pressure, and the awareness helped that the big company, I don't remember who it was actually, or the few who actually came through with a recycling method, with grinding the styrofoam and then recycling it and using it again, that they finally pushed themselves as well. And for the wood, we recycled wood like 10, 15 years ago already, and sometimes it's a little bit of fight to get a couple of more days of striking a set out of it, because it's much easier to crush it, to put it in a container and forget it, than take it apart carefully, take the screws out, take the nails out, because you can hardly use structural elements if they're contaminated with nails and screws. You can use them for less than if you have like a timber or a 2x4, which is not destroyed or doesn't have any penetrations through nails and so forth in it.
One more?
So you kind of touched on earlier, I'm just going to go back quickly to the research process, how when you were working with Ruth Carter, she was kind of head of doing the research and things like that. And so as art director, what does the collaboration process look like when you're first coming up with ideas and things like that?
As an art director, not a lot actually, because the collaboration happens between the production designer and the costume designer. We are, as a supervising art director, basically the right hand of the production designer. And if the production designer comes to us, gives us a sketch, you can't identify what it actually is, but he is expecting us to develop it, to draw it, to execute it, so we can touch it after maybe a month or 2 or 3 months of building time. So we have to find a way to physically build some of the craziest ideas. You can't even imagine that somebody can come up with something like that. So, but it's challenging, but for me personally, and I still love my job, and that's why I don't want to stop working, It's working with different people, with absolutely amazingly educated craftsmen who are pushing themselves every day on every show, going further because technology always changes and we have less and less time to build. So you have to be clever, you have to get really efficient. And everybody pulls on the same rope, and a chain is as strong as the weakest link. So everybody wants to succeed and work together, and that's one of my just main motivation. You work with people and you try to reach a goal, and you know you can't do it alone, and you just hire the right people. So that's the beauty of this job, and you can be creative, and you can see it 4 years after what we, not I, what we did.
Thank you so much. I invite you to please put your hands together for this. And now I cordially invite you for some refreshments in the cafe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gut, sehr gut. Sehr gut, sehr tut mir leid, nicht mehr Leute sind, aber was soll ich machen, gell? Die sind immer 1500 sein, gell? Nein, das ist...
That was very interesting.
Oh, you're welcome.
I was curious about the Batman set, you know, the rampant stuff.
Yes.
How long do these things take to make?
The Batmobile took from beginning of design to the first test runs took about 6 or 7 months.
Oh my gosh.
And building the Batcave from the beginning to the end was about 6 months.
Just the cave itself?
Yeah.
And then you take it up down, or does it stay?
Yes.
You take it down.
We took it down because there was another production to the same stage.
And so where do you build all of this stuff? Like, is this
in the
studio?
In the studio, where it actually is, and yeah. Do you have some minutes because I'm